In the grim darkness of the far future, humanity believes it has already endured its darkest trials. The Horus heresy shattered the dream of the Great Crusade. The Emperor was entombed upon the Golden Throne. The galaxy burned, and from its ashes rose a regime built not on hope, but on survival. And yet, 10,000 years later, in the 36th millennium, the Imperium would suffer a wound not carved by traitor legions or alien war fleets, but by devotion twisted into madness. This was the beginning of the Age of Apostasy. To understand how the Imperium nearly destroyed itself, we must understand the rot that had already set in. By this era, the Imperium of Man in the universe of Warhammer 40K was vast beyond comprehension. 1,000,000 worlds, uncountable billions of souls, endless wars fought on 1,000 fronts, but the Imperium was no longer the rational, secular empire envisioned during the Great Crusade. It had become a theocracy. The Emperor was no longer merely mankind's greatest leader, he was a god. And faith was no longer a private comfort, it was law. At the center of this religious transformation stood the Adeptus Ministorum, the Ecclesiarchy, the state church of the Imperium. Its cathedrals towered over hive cities. Its priests preached fire and damnation. Its confessions could condemn a man to death. In a galaxy where chaos preyed upon doubt, faith was a shield, but shields can become swords, and swords, in the wrong hands, can slaughter entire civilizations. Enter Goge Vandire. Few names in imperial history inspire such dread as Goge Vandire. He did not begin as a conqueror. He was not a space marine warlord or a mutant demagogue. He was a bureaucrat, a functionary, a man who understood systems and how to bend them. Through manipulation, political assassination, blackmail, and ruthless ambition, Vandire rose through the ranks of the Administratum, the vast bureaucracy that kept the Imperium functioning. In time, he secured a seat among the High Lords of Terra, the most powerful governing body in the Imperium. But that was not enough. In a move as unprecedented as it was catastrophic, Vandire consolidated two of the most powerful offices in the Imperium under his control. He became both master of the Administratum and ecclesiarch of the Adeptus Ministorum. He controlled the Imperium's bureaucracy and its religion. The machinery of governance and the machinery of faith answered to one man, and that man was unstable. Vandire was paranoid, theatrical, and utterly convinced of his own divine mandate. He surrounded himself with sycophants and executed anyone who dared question him. Entire planetary governors were accused of heresy and replaced with loyal zealots. Tithes were increased beyond sustainability, bleeding worlds dry. Famine spread, rebellions sparked, and were crushed with merciless brutality. This era would become known as the Reign of Blood. Under Vandire's command, the ecclesiarchy transformed from a spiritual authority into a militant enforcer of orthodoxy. Public executions became spectacles of devotion. Entire populations were purged for perceived impurity. The line between loyalty and heresy grew thinner by the day. To doubt was to die, and yet, the most terrifying aspect of Vandire's rule was not merely his cruelty. It was his ability to convince others that he acted in the Emperor's name. The Imperium is built on faith in a silent God. The Emperor does not speak. He does not intervene openly. His will is interpreted by men, and Vandire claimed that he alone understood that will. He staged miracles. He manipulated relics and engineered divine signs to reinforce his authority. In a civilization desperate for certainty, he provided absolute answers, but tyranny requires enforcers. On the distant world of San'Leer, Vandire encountered a militant religious order, the Daughters of the Emperor. These warrior women were devout beyond measure, trained in arms, and utterly dedicated to their faith. Vandire saw in them the perfect instrument, incorruptible in devotion, unquestioning in obedience. Through deception and calculated theatrics, he convinced them that he was the chosen voice of the Emperor. That to serve him was to serve the master of mankind himself. Renamed the brides of the emperor, they became his personal guard and executioners. Their power armor gleamed beneath cathedral lights, their bolters roared in the emperor's name, and wherever they marched, blood followed. These women would one day be known as the Adepta Sororitas, but under Vandire they were instruments of oppression. Entire noble houses were eradicated at his command. Cardinals who dared question him were dragged from their pulpits and shot upon the steps of their own cathedrals. Terra itself trembled beneath the weight of his purges. Imagine the scale of it, the heart of humanity, holy Terra awash in suspicion, informants whispering in every corridor, priests denouncing rivals to secure favor, Administratum officials vanishing overnight, and above it all, Vandire preaching that this suffering was holy, that pain was purification, that the emperor demanded it. The high lords who opposed him found themselves isolated. Some were executed, others were discredited. A few attempted open resistance and failed. The Imperium, so accustomed to fighting external wars, found itself paralyzed by internal terror. Communication between sectors faltered. Military resources were redirected to enforce Vandire's will rather than defend against alien threats. Across the galaxy, enemies pressed their advantage. The Imperium was bleeding, and it did not even realize the knife was in its own hand. Yet no tyranny is eternal. Even in the suffocating grip of Vandire's regime, voices of dissent began to rise. Whispers at first, then sermons. On distant worlds, preachers spoke of corruption at the heart of the Ecclesiarchy. They dared to suggest that the emperor's will could not possibly align with such cruelty. One of those voices would change everything. Sebastian Thor was not a general, not a noble, not a high lord. He was a confessor, a preacher of uncommon charisma and conviction. Where Vandire ruled through fear, Thor spoke of humility. Where Vandire demanded blind obedience, Thor called for spiritual integrity. His message spread across systems like wildfire in dry brush. He did not deny the emperor's divinity. He did not call for rebellion against the Imperium.
He did not deny the emperor's divinity.
He accused Vandire of apostasy, of betraying the very faith he claimed to defend. And that accusation struck at the heart of the regime. World after world began to question Terra's authority. Planetary governors hesitated before carrying out new purges. Cardinals secretly pledged support to Thor's reformist movement. What began as theological disagreement escalated into political defiance. The Imperium stood on the brink of civil war. Vandire responded, as he always did, with violence. Fleets were dispatched to crush rebellious systems. The brides of the emperor were unleashed upon dissenting clergy. Entire cities burned for harboring traitors. But for every world silenced, two more seemed to rise. The Age of Apostasy had begun in deception and consolidation of power. Now it threatened to engulf the Imperium in open conflict. And the most chilling truth of all, every faction claimed to act in the Emperor's name. There were no obvious heretics, no chaos banners flying over Terra, no demonic incursions tearing reality apart. This was a war of faith against faith, doctrine against doctrine, brother against brother, sister against sister. For the common citizen of the Imperium, survival became a matter of guessing which interpretation of the Emperor's will would prevail. Pray to the wrong cleric, and you might be denounced. Support the wrong reformer, and you might be executed. Neutrality was impossible. As tensions escalated, even the Adeptus Custodes, the silent guardians of the Emperor, could no longer ignore the chaos consuming the throne world. For millennia, they had stood watch over the Golden Throne, intervening rarely in political affairs. But Vandire's actions threatened the stability of the Imperium itself, and stability is the lifeblood of mankind's survival. The stage was set, a tyrant cloaked in faith, a reformer preaching truth, a militant sisterhood bound by devotion. A million worlds watching Terra with dread. The Imperium had survived the Horus heresy. It had endured alien invasions and black crusades. But now it faced a subtler horror, the corruption of its own soul. Could the Emperor's realm withstand a war not of bolters and battle tanks, but of belief? Could truth pierce the armor of fanaticism? Or would humanity's greatest empire collapse beneath the weight of its own dogma? The reign of blood was far from over.